Welcome to the Church of Mabus with your hosts, Jeffery Pritchett and Guy Weddle. Just want to say real quick, we have a new website URL, thechurchofmabus.com. That's thechurchofmabus.com. Stop on by and show your support at the forum. Give us some show feedback. You can also find us on Facebook at the Church of Mabus Radio Show group on Facebook. So basically, we're going to get right to the guests because we have a contest, and basically we already have the winners, and we're going to ask their questions during the show, and they get a free book signed by Jeff Mudgett, Bloodstains. Our guest is here to talk about Herman Webster Mudgett, otherwise known as H.H. Holmes, known throughout American history, or the first person to be really labeled, I guess, as the first serial killer. He's going to get into it rather deeply. It's a fascinating subject. It's not for the faint of heart. It's definitely not for light worker, prostitute hippies, or tree huggers. So if you're any of those, you may just want to step back because this might give you nightmares tonight. Welcome, Jeff Mudgett. How are you, Jeff? Are you there?
I'm here. Hey, Guy and Jeff, thanks for having me on. It's an honor, and I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Yeah, so
Absolute dark pleasure, sir. Absolute dark pleasure. So, Jeff, first off, we're going to ask you the questions from the contest winners. I'm just going to kind of mix those in. But the first question that I wanted to ask is I want you to introduce Holmes, or Herman, so to speak, to the audience. If you could just give them an introduction to him on some level for those who may not be completely familiar with him. If you could just, give an introduction regarding Holmes.
Yeah, I'll be glad to. He was, after all my years of research and digging past the artificial stuff on top, he has turned out to be, for me and for anyone that reads the book, the most evil human being that maybe ever lived. Now, you can get into the Hitlers and the Neros and those things, the men that ordered people around them to murder, and they certainly have, they earn the evil title as well. But this man did it all himself and yearned for the feel of knife in tissue and screams. And I just think he is the worst ever. And when I was about, 42, 43 years old, I was oblivious to him, didn't know who he was, hadn't done any readings of the 20 or so books that were already in existence about him, and was at a family dinner, and my grandmother was going over the results of a study she had done to see who we were all related to. And as it turned out, the professionals had dug in a little bit and then told her to let it go, that she should let sleeping dogs lie, to use the old term. When we all demanded to know why, my brother stood up, who had helped her with the study, and explained that the reason why was Herman Webster Mudgett, who was my great-great-grandfather, my grandfather's grandfather, and had been the first man characterized as a serial killer in America. Well, at that, my grandfather stood up at the head of the table, slammed his chair back, painting slams down to the floor. I can still see it in my eye, just as clear as it had been yesterday. Screamed at the whole family that name would never be used in his presence again, and stared, while he was saying that, pointed his finger and stared at me. And there were 20 of us there, and I had no idea why he was looking at me. I never heard this name before. And after that time, my grandfather died of cancer. And about 4 or 5 years after that, my father left me some secret family heirlooms, which mostly involved my grandfather's fishing material. And the story of bloodstains is about what was inside those tackle boxes and my study to see if they were true or not.
Okay, so if you could, when did he change his name? I mean, was Holmes just like his Elias, and then Mudgett was his original name?
Well, he probably used 20 or 30 Elias aliases, and when he would use one too much and it would lose its handiness, he'd just take another. And you got to understand, this man had one legal wife and probably 200 women in his life, and many kids, all illegitimate except my line. And so he used names like we all use underwear. It was amazing.
All right, well, let me fit in one of the contest questioners, John Bonanno. He has a two-part question. Did Holmes make a cautious decision to move to a city because he knew he needed lots of easy victims? And also, did he kill before he became Holmes?
Well, that's a great question, and I understand exactly where he's coming from. He's big cities. Think of it like a lion in Africa with the savannah and the antelope. He needed to be where there was the most people, and the easiest access to them are the large cities. So he used all of the large ones: Detroit, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, London, and that's where he liked to work. So.
So it was like hunting game, pretty much. He had this vast environment that he provided victims.
Yeah, and you've got to remember, like, think of the murder castle in Chicago, the building that he built from the ground up to murder his victims. He's situated at a Junction Grove, they call it, where the railroad station came from Chicago down the line and will make the 90 to the World's Fair that was going to be built. And he planned it years ahead, planning on the fair being built. He knew that there would be 20 to 30,000 people a day. He then built site as a hotel and a pharmacy with the basement underneath to conduct his operations, within 100 feet of where they would have to get on and off the trains to go from the big city to the fair. So you can see the way he thought. It was probably the first building, maybe the only building that was ever constructed for the purpose of serial killing, which should send a chill down anyone's spine. And it was built for him to experience the death of others. It was a human disassembly plant, and it was for his business. So you can see why it's easy for me to call him the most evil man that ever lived, and a monster, and it's easy to do.
So, Jeff, what was his first victim in the murder castle?
I don't know the name. I don't. Those facts are not out. But I can tell you, I think he first killed at 11 or 12 and never stopped. There were times when he killed 6 in a week. And if you take the years that he lived, which is far more than, I believe, far more than the people that thought he was hung after he was tried, you can run the number up and you have a mass murder number that is awful to even contemplate, but I think provable.
Well, they claimed like 250 or more, but they only convicted him for like 9, right, or something?
Well, he admitted to 27, and most of the authors run that number up to 2 or 250, like you say. My estimate is probably 2,000, and obviously that's a number that's impossible to prove. But like I say, when you just do the mathematics of how long he lived and some of the notes he made of what he needed for his studies, 250 was way too short.
So if you could, I want the audience, the listeners, to know the ferocious genius of Holmes. Tell us about some of the ways he killed people in the murder castle.
Well, he had his studies, his scientific studies. This is a man who, graduated from the University of Michigan School of Medicine with maybe the highest ever recorded IQ, way above just plain genius. He probably invented the first 2 anesthesias that went on to be used daily by the medical science. He was interested in hormones because he wanted to live forever, and that was why he was fascinated with the female victims that were the majority of his victims. He did studies on increasing the height of human beings by actually stretching a woman out and then having her impregnated by one of his assistants to see if that could. Obviously, that was not going to happen. But he was a real-life Dr. Frankenstein with a basement down below that. But his biggest problem was ridding himself of the waste when he was performing these operations and murders. And this building was set up from the beginning to alleviate the waste. He even had a business selling skeletons to the medical schools around America, and his were known as the most pristine for obvious reasons. He was walking in the door selling these things off of 19, 20-year-old young ladies that had been his victims.
All right. Well, I have a question from Ann Miller's story. She asked, should all the full body skeletons and other remains purchased by universities and hospitals from his medical supply business be tracked down, confiscated, and given a decent burial? What do you think about that?
I know exactly that's a wonderful question, and I know exactly how she feels, and I agree with her. That I don't know if those things still exist in medical schools today. I don't know how long they last. I'm not qualified to make that statement, but if they did still exist, I agree 100% they should not be there. They should be given a proper burial. And the details and of how these facilities came into possession of these skeletons should be investigated. And like I say, if they were provided by Holmes or his assistants, they should be put down properly. I agree. These young ladies would have suffered the most horrible death your listeners can imagine. Think of yourself, 100 years ago, strapped down in a gurney or a table, knowing, looking around, knowing what's going to happen, and have this thing over you, actually enjoying and doing a study on how much pain you could take before he allowed you to die. I mean, that's not a skeleton that should be used in one of our medical facilities. If, like I say, if that's still happening.
Yeah, probably like a lot of negativity and stuff like that around it too.
I would imagine if that still hangs on, you're right, that's not a good thing for the young students that we all are going to count on to practice medicine in our society.
Yeah, I wonder if he, I'm kind of wondering if maybe it was it any type of sexual thing with him with that that you know of? I mean, did he he probably sang songs and, you know, it was just like filling a prescription to him or something like that.
You know, that's the stereotypical thing, and I ran that down. There was a few books that touched on that, and I don't think it was that way at all. He was a charming, debonair man who had no problem with women, and I don't think there was a rape element involved. He didn't need to do that, and it wasn't something he was looking for. I don't think, like I say, it wasn't there. But there was none of that evidence came up. So I would, you know, if I had to testify about it, I'd put my hand up and say, no, there was not a sexual component, other than he needed the hormones that he thought were in the ovaries of the young ladies.
Yeah, one of my biggest things that, well, I saw, I've seen a couple documentaries on him, and one of the things that really kind of got me, it wasn't really the, you know, the gurney or the gassing, it was the slow death of being locked in the dark in a giant safe. You know?
It's a horrifying thing to contemplate, isn't it?
Yeah, if you think about it, you know, you're in there, no one can hear you screaming. You know, it's just dark, and it's just, you know, and he just walks away and leaves you there. Comes back and, you know, and
and he watched,
takes your flesh off.
He had secret rooms where he could watch you and see how you reacted to hunger or to cold or to the elements that he could create in an experimental fashion. And he loved to see how humans broke down under pressure, pain, and fear. And from his writings, the element most powerful in all of our lives, if we were subjected to that, is fear. We can overcome the cold, the hunger, the lack of water until you die. But fear was what he knew he could control all of us with. Even the strongest men, they all broke down with the fear element and the torture.
On the front of the book, there's a quote. "I was born with the devil in me. He has been with me ever since." Herman Webster Mudgett.
He stated that, I think it was to either the Philadelphia Sun or the New York Times while he was either during trial or awaiting execution. I cut that down a little bit to fit on the front of the book. But the entire quote here, let me see if I can find it for you, is no, I don't have it here with me, but I cut that down a little bit, and it's an amazing quote, and I thought it fit well on the book with those eyes of his when you look at the cover.
Yeah, I think that was when he was doing his thing for Hearst, his confession they paid him for.
Yeah, he took some money from Hearst to do the memoirs, and they would come in, and he'd write every day as they gave him a little table, and he'd write every day, and the papers would come in and interview him every day, and it was the O.J. Simpson trial of the nation for the 19th century.
So when it I guess I want to work our way into, first let me ask this question, then I want to get into the diary and your seizures where he apparently tries to communicate with you. And the question, let's let this question lead into that from Jane Doe. Right. How do you feel about the mean gene, meaning you inherited this via DNA passed down the family tree? How do you feel about the theory about mean? I mean, do you suffer from a mean gene? How did you find out about your connection with him? When you found out, I know you started having a dark voice talk to you, and I think that was followed by a seizure. But as far as genes and DNA, how does that play into this, being related to this serial killer in your life?
Well, let me first start that question, that's one of the most important things for me when I started writing the book. I wanted to know, because I knew I owed my existence to conscious decisions this monster had made, and more than that, that if he hadn't lived, I wouldn't have either, and that evil component of him, I wanted to know if it had carried over into my own life and my own makeup. Now, I don't know how much medical science has proven on that line yet. They have I try to read anything about that, and I still do. They have issues about how serial killers, when they're put down, they dissect the brains to see if there's a different brain there. And I think they're starting to find out that psychotics think differently than normal human beings. And there is a physical component to it, a larger part of, I think it's the left side of the brain. Like I say, we're getting out of my expertise here. But there is a different physiological component to a psychotic's brain. And that is a genetic thing which can be passed down. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to write the book so much was to show the world that even with this in my family's genes and blood, my family is a good, strong family that hasn't been criminal in any way after him. And that was one of the strongest reasons for me to want to write the book.
Well, it's definitely, so after you read, it's definitely fascinating to get into the subject of genes and how they, pass down. And I think it's definitely, it happens. My father was very violent, and I'm not really, but when I get angry, there's something there that definitely wants me to be.
And if we're all honest with each other and ourselves, we all have thoughts. I've had thoughts about violent thoughts and maybe not fantasies, but your imagination runs wild on you a little bit. And once you've had these thoughts and then someone comes up to you and says, you're a direct descendant of this thing, it turns your whole life and how you justified these things upside down. And that's, like I said, anybody that had been put in my position with this knowledge and then given these things by the family, you probably would have wanted to research it and maybe write a book yourself.
Yeah, well, listen, my great-uncle was Charlie Pitts, and he ran with the James Gang, Quantrell. He's a murderous bastard. Killed a lot of people, robbed a lot of banks, did a lot of bad stuff. There's a fear that keeps us from actually crossing that line, and I think serial killers and people who do that type of stuff, they don't have that fear. I don't think that exists for them. So that line isn't there to be crossed. You know what I mean?
Exactly right. There's a morality component to good human beings, and I know I read an article in a magazine a little while ago that they're starting to think now that morality actually is a chemical component in the brain, and that someone like Gandhi would have more than Jeffrey Dahmer. So, which makes sense, because when you look at the things that this man did, he obviously had no morality. He wasn't mentally ill in any way. He was pure genius, brilliant, but he enjoyed this. And I think this issue they're bringing up now about that chemical part of the brain that creates a good side in us may be true. And I think in the next 10, 20 years we're going to learn a lot more about the brain than we do now.
So, Jeff, when it comes to the diary, could you tell us a bit about what was in the diary And also, I guess this is a two-part question. Did the diary spark the seizures and the communications?
Well, the story in Bloodstains is about how I at first tried to establish the validity of the diaries, and the book talks about and tells my readers, and I want to stay away from this a little bit because how the book ends has to do with what the diaries are and what a reader I want a reader to take away from the book. But the book is not about H.H. Holmes like Devil in the White City is or Depraved. Those are historical fictions or non-fictions talking about a killer. My Bloodstains is about my journey to establish how much of all this was the truth based on me being given more information than these other authors had. And then, as you say, finding myself wrapped up in a psychological horror and a journey that put my life in danger when I developed the epilepsy. Now, some of my friends, and my best friend and manager, thinks that if you've read anything about Holmes, there was a component to his career that the New York Times called the Holmes curse. They use that phrase because of the 20 or 30 people who suffered death or misfortune following his arrest, trial, and supposed execution. They were all people that had affected him negatively. Well, I don't believe in something like a curse, and it was hard for me to accept that. So what I did was took these diaries and piece by piece went through and saw and determined what I could see was the truth, because I knew that if I established that the curse was not a real thing, I could prove that he had escaped the hanging. And that was really my reason for writing the book as well. But what happened, as you brought up, Jeff, I was slowly, I was forced to take a part also in running away from this curse that I didn't want to believe in. And like I say, I developed the epilepsy, which I don't know if either one of you know anyone that's had an epileptic seizure, but it is probably one of the most horrifying things that a human being can experience. It's a
Do you think there's any type of, you say you have his diaries, do you think there's some sort of negativity or part of him that's still attached to that? A lot of people in the ghost field will say that objects, carry the energy of their owners and that sort of thing. Do you think you're kind of dealing with something like that?
I'm not sure I would buy into a negativity. It might exist. I don't. I can tell you after I finished writing the book and published it, most of those things, the negativities, went away from me, and I think it had more to do with me finishing what I had dedicated my life to and establishing the truth about this thing, rather than an object that cast a spell on me or a negativity. So I wouldn't go that far, but I can tell you when I went into the post office and down into the basement in Chicago, there was a huge negativity down there, and there was no in mind. When I went down there, I did not believe in hauntings or paranormal. As I walked out back into the fresh air, I certainly did. And,
yeah.
I can tell you the employees that worked at that post office certainly do too.
So what happened
Yeah.
at the post office exactly? That's one of his murder sites?
Well, okay. The post office was built on the site of the murder castle at Junction Grove. It was purchased in 1937 by the federal government for $61,000. The other books that you read talk about the murder castle having been burnt to the ground. Well, we started understanding that that wasn't the case because we had pictures of the castle with the 1935 Ford truck next to it. So obviously, much of what we were reading wasn't true. We ran it down and found out that the government had bought the building knowing exactly what it was, and that always bothered me. And I know that will send chills down your listener's spine. Think about, why would the federal government have wanted to buy the most evil place in American history, maybe, and put our symbol for good and government on top of it, the post office? And that always bothered me. It bothered the heck out of me. Well, so we ran it down more. It was built on the existing foundation of the murder castle. They used portions of the walls. We didn't know what was down there, but we knew that there had been a film crew that had been given permission to go down there some years ago. They had been given permission for 3 days. After the first night, they ran like heck away from there and never came back. And the film never came out. The custodian that we met told us that they had been scared to death, and they just wasn't worth doing the film. So I wanted to be able to write the story and be able to give my readers what I felt by touching everything in the book that I could find, everything, the graves, the sites, the places, all of it. And number one, obviously, was this basement of this post office with the existing foundation. So my friend and I, one day, went out to Englewood from Chicago. And I don't know if either one of you has ever been there, but it is perhaps one of the most terrible urban places there is maybe in America. I had never seen anything like this, and it made me ashamed that America has something like this, that there were kids growing up there. The police would get out of their cars to buy cigarettes or a Coke with full SWAT gear. The dwellings, the apartments, were crumbling down. It looked like one of our fighter jets had flown over in Iraq and dropped a bomb on the area. So I was the only, I don't even want to, this isn't to be racist. A white person on the street there, cars would drive by, the drivers would do a double take, see me, and stop, because I wasn't supposed to be there. So anyway, in the middle of all this was this beautiful white post office. We walked around, determined that it was the proper place with the railroad tracks and all. Walked in the front door, and I had a little seizure right in the front door where I can see it as clear as day now, and I explain it in the book. And like I say, the book is a psychological thriller about my journey, and I don't mind telling your listeners, parts of the book. It always irritates me when you get an author on one of your shows and they won't talk about the story because they don't want to ruin the story for their readers. I don't mind this. As I walked in the front door, I had a seizure, and it pounded my chest, and the air actually moved like waves away from me in the opening to this post office. and I had little visions about what it looked like in the past, back and forth between the present and the past. My buddy saw that I was having trouble, and he can tell you all this. This is absolutely the truth. He sat me down, got me some water, let it all calm down. I got a hold of myself. We sat there for 4 hours trying to talk the supervisors in the post office into allowing us into the basement. They said no, absolutely no. They don't let anyone down there. Well, my buddy Kim is an actor in Hollywood, and he can talk his way into anything. He worked and worked and worked, and we finally got the custodian to talk the supervisor and let us go down. But during these 4 hours, 3 or 4 employees would come over and say that the basement was haunted. No one went down there. No one had been down there in years. They didn't use it anymore. And that they used to have burglar alarms go off down below. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but when a federal building has a burglar alarm, they've got to do reports, and they've got to have studies, and they've got to determine exactly what happened. Well, they got so tired of doing this stuff, because they never found out anything, they just turned the burglar alarms off for the basement and just barricaded the door. No one went down. So when we got permission, the custodian was not afraid to go down. He took Kim and I down, and when we originally got down there, it was just a real clean-looking convoy with 2 big openings on either end after a double stairs down. But then we found the original bricks of part of the old building, and I swear it was probably the most chilling experience of my life to put my fingers on those bricks and know that that was part of the murder castle, and that's what the victims saw that were down in that basement. It was horrifying.
So aren't you are you making plans to go with the ghost hunters down there? Is that the place you were telling me about?
I'm currently involved with 3 or 4 groups that are trying to make, a presentation to go down there and do a documentary. Right now it's on hold because this post office is one of the ones the federal government has put up on the list of closings. And I don't know if that would make it easier or not to do a story about the basement. But I tell you what, the Ghost Hunters, the Ghost Adventurers, and the National Geographic, if they want to do the paranormal story to end all paranormal stories, this is the one, because all of the 3 of us that went down there that day, we all felt the negativity or the presence, and there's no, like I say, I went down there and I didn't believe in any of this stuff. But when I came out, there's no doubt in my mind that it's down in that room.
It's the abyss of hell. So as far as when you have these seizures, is there some type of communication that you think is Holmes? And if so, what does it say?
Well, I tell you, when a seizure is a like I said before, is a strange thing. You can go back in time, you can go ahead in time, it's like a colored dream, but you can still feel yourself moving like you're walking. And down in the basement that day, I could feel, as I explained in the book, Holmes talking to me about what he wanted me to do down there and explaining when the visions would go in and out of past and present, what I was seeing. Now, when I went to the neurologists, neurospecialists, they explained to me that what that was, there was nothing unusual in that. That's what epileptics see, especially ones that suffer from grand mal seizures. and there was nothing unusual about voices or visions. I asked the one doctor, I said, well, yeah, but wait a minute. I had never been down there, and I knew exactly where the original brick was. How do you explain that when I'd never been down there before? I'd never seen a picture. And, of course, he couldn't. And that's what I'm hoping, if I get to go back down there again with one of these groups, that maybe they can record me having another seizure and then record me explaining what I'm seeing. Because I'd love to be able to prove that I'm not making it up, and that actually is little flashbacks to the past, and it's real.
Have you ever felt pressure to continue his reign of terror?
No.
That's a nice question.
No. In the book, that's all right. In the book, there's a chapter about following a woman on a street and him trying to talk me into something. And but no, nothing like that ever happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's dark forces. They're around everyone on some level. I mean, and I've gotten really angry at people I've heard. I mean, I haven't heard audio-wise, but I have, where it's definitely obvious that there's a dark part within inside of us that would love for us to let go and just do it. Or it's a demon or whatever you want to call it. But I think everybody has it, but some may have it more because of this, passing down of genes on some level. I believe that's, a possibility too. Like, for instance, I have a fascination with Vlad the Impaler that's just bizarre. And I collect books on him, pictures. I have, a framed picture of him in my home. And, I know what he did was sick. But there's just this morbid curiosity. Even though during his times it was pretty messed up, so I can understand why. But I heard recently the Norway killer, was into him, and that made me want to throw up. I was like, dude, you give Vlad a bad name. But back in those times, if someone buried my family alive and I was fighting the Turks or whatever, that seems a little more prevalent to go crazy back then than it does now, I guess. So I could certainly understand those dark things urging us to be dark. I've dealt with them all my life, as the guy has as well. But to actually have that relation, what were some of the things he talked about in the diary?
Well, the things you can imagine. I mean, I cover them in the book. There's 3 or 4 chapters. Well, what I do is something from the diary I carry in italics so that my readers know when it's diary and when it's me. And the part that I find fascinating the most is he had a fascination with bullfighting, and as all of us have thought at one time or another, we all wonder, why do the Latin cultures have this thrill with putting that animal to that death and cheering the celebration and the pomp? And he loved to go watch this, and he wrote about it. And he wrote about one bullfight where, and it's 10, 12 pages in the book, and he watched the bullfighter put the bull down. It wasn't a good death. The animal was screaming in pain. They have the other man that comes out and tries to put the bull out of its misery, and he was terribly. And when they finally killed the bull and they drag him off with the mules with the meat hooks, the crowd cheers this pretty bullfighter with his with the flowers from the crowd, and Holmes, of course, found this fascinating. So what he did was he followed the bullfighter home, carried on the shoulders of his fans. He was drunk. They put him down. Holmes broke into the house, sat in the chair, watched the bullfighter slowly come around, tied him up, and then explained. Holmes spoke wonderful Spanish. about 6 languages. And then he explained to the bullfighter that he was going to die, but that he wanted to recreate the death the bullfighter had just given the bull. So what he did was, he explained to the bullfighter how when his first bullfight, he was shocked to see that they didn't allow the bull to fight the matador in his complete physical sense. They have the man called the picador come out on the horse, and this horse is padded. He's blindfolded, because if the horse wasn't blindfolded, he wouldn't get anywhere near this bull. They come out, and the tendons across the top of the bull's shoulder and neck, so that his ability to gore is reduced, I don't know how many 100%, but it's a huge amount. So that's what you see when you see I don't remember exactly what they were called, but the sticks hanging out of the bull's neck and those razor-sharp blades that have cut the tendons and reduced the bull to a shadow of his champion self. Then the bullfighter comes out and gets the cheers of the fans. So Holmes explained to the bullfighter that he and the matador were going to fight, but he was going to do the same thing to the matador that the matador had done to the bull. So he sliced the tendons in his wrist, gave him a knife, untied him, and then they had a knife fight. Well, of course, the matador had no chance. He could hardly hold a knife, let alone fight with a man when your wrists are sliced. And Holmes wrote about this experience, chuckling evilly as to how he had explained to the matador that, maybe this wasn't such a great thing, these bullfights. So I found that fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. That's actually a great story.
That gave me goosebumps.
There's another one in the book that I won't get that deep into because I don't want to spoil it for your readers, but there's a scene in there where there was a police chief in Chicago that was bothering him immensely, and he and his assistant went to their home, put them out. When they were putting the chief out and his daughter, they killed the wife, gave her a little too much anesthesia. It was in the early days. Brought them back and then tortured the father using the daughter. And it's even more horrible than the matador scene. So there's stuff in there that your readers will not believe a human being is capable of, and he certainly was.
Well, I'm a big human nature type person, and none of this shocks me. Essentially, people are capable of just the greatest evil and capable of doing the most horrible things to each other and to themselves. It's just, I think everybody, like you said earlier, has that in them. I just don't think that, I think there's certain things that keep us from crossing that line.
I agree. There is no doubt that mankind has good, strong people that will help others. But there is also no doubt that man has members that need the fear of law and order to keep them from crossing lines. And that's one thing I hope my book helps with. Society has to know that. Don't think that there's this good in all. Some do not have that good, and law and the punishment they get for crossing those lines is essential that we keep.
Yeah, look at all the laws that are in place just in the United States to keep us from killing, stealing, robbing each other, or what? Speeding, all these things that have to be placed for us to conduct ourselves in a civilized manner. And we still don't even do that, But it's...
Imagine the anarchy and the chaos if we didn't have those laws. And as they are liberalized and made softer and softer, I hate to bring it up now, but look like Norway, where there's no capital punishment. I mean, the guy for killing 60-some people can get 20 years max.
That's it. If he lives, you know.
Society is on the verge of that again, especially if the dollar collapses. It's right. It's just right on the spark of it. That's
yeah, I mean, if you go to different countries, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I mean, if you go to different countries, someone in our room just brought this up, but if you go to countries like Africa, you know, that's just compared to what people are like in the United States, in the civilized Western world, have no idea, you know, the horrors that are going on in a lot of these countries in Africa. I mean, it's just, and in the Middle East and stuff like that, it is just mind-boggling that the things that these people do to each other, you know. And they don't have the laws and stuff like that in place, or the laws aren't, you know, enforced. And that's the type of things that happen. You know, you have mass rapes, and you have, you know, infanticide, and just, you name it.
I agree, and it just, I don't know. I don't quite know how to sum it all up, but I know we need those punishments. We need those punishments because there are those out there. But you know what? I don't want to scare your listeners into thinking that bloodstains. Obviously, it is much about a horrible subject, but anyone that has read it to the end, it's a good story which talks about the better side of human beings and how good they can be even with this thing's blood in their systems. And the story at the end about how my grandfather saved my family from this thing by moving the whole family to California to get away from them, I think will inspire a lot of people into knowing that human beings are also great things with this thing inside them which makes them want to do good for others. And I hope when I always tell my readers, because I get emails now by the hundreds every day, and I always get a story from maybe a young lady, 20, 25 years old. It's too horrible. I'm at the halfway through, and I love your book, but I can't keep going. And I always tell them, please, stay with it. Keep going, because the end, you're going to feel refreshed that you saw how bad it could be, but then you saw how good it was, and you're going to come away much, much better. And it works. I get them to stay with it, and then they write me back and say how wonderful they thought the ending was and how incredible my grandfather was as a man, and he knew this thing. He actually had to fight with this thing, and he won. And it's a great ending to the story about what man can do, even in the face of a monster like this.
All right, Jeff, what's your, we're going to have to go on a 10-minute break, and then when we come back, we're going to get into Jack the Ripper heavily. First, we're going to talk to Jeff about it, and then we're going to bring in another guest for 30 minutes with Jeff, Mark Potts, and we're going to talk about it. So there's a Holmes and Jack the Ripper connection that's very fascinating. Jeff, if you could real quick, what is your website link, and then we'll go to break.
Well, thank you very much. The book is obviously for sale, ebook on Amazon Kindle, iBook, Nook, all those things you can get at Smashwords. But I sell it on the print, and if a reader would like it signed, I try to sign as many as I can, getting them out. But you can get it at www.bloodstainsthebook, one word, bloodstainsthebook.com, and we sell it for $13.99, and that includes shipping. And like I say, I try to get a signature on every one. Which, when we come back from your break and talk about the part of this taking London by storm right now, Mark I have proven that Holmes was Jack the Ripper, and it's amazing to watch what's happening right now.
Alrighty, thanks, Jeff. We'll be back shortly. Thanks, everybody. Remember to check out thechurchofmabus.com as well to show your support. Be right back.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
That's right, Jack's back. Not Jack Nicholson, Jack the Ripper. We're back with Jeff Mudgett, author of Bloodstains. And now we're about to summon forth the evil soul and spirit of Jack the Ripper, who Jeff Mudgett and Mark Potts have some pretty convincing evidence regarding Holmes being Jack the Ripper. And Jeff just wrote an article in Ripperologist magazine, which is a magazine about Jack the Ripper that comes out in London. Kind of weird, but hey, who am I to complain about weird? But it sounds like a cool magazine. Jeff just wrote an article and Mark by the last 30 minutes, and we're going to talk about the connection with Holmes and Jack the Ripper. So tell us, Jeff, what gives with that?
Well, first, I'm going to correct something you said. You said convincing. It's not convincing. This is proof, direct evidence who Jack the Ripper is, and I'm totally excited about it because I had two major publishing houses tell me they would have published my book had I took the chapter out where I said Holmes was the Ripper. I said, no, I'll do it. I'll self-publish. I'm not going to let you tell me how to write my book. And now, with this evidence coming out because of Mark Potts' hard work, I tell you what, it's a great feeling for me to be able to tell those guys and put my finger in it.
Well,
you should have listened to me.
Yeah, definitely. I always heard or thought they had that big book by, I can't remember the broad's name. She did that body farm thing, but some book about Jack the Ripper being an artist with a mutilated penis.
There are rooms full of books about authors saying they know who Jack the Ripper was. It's incredible. When you go to Google, it's still the #1 issue on hits on Google. Huge thing. They have forums in London that just go on and on and on about discussing who the Ripper still is. It's an amazing thing to watch because there are far worse. Holmes was so much worse than the Ripper. It's not even worth contemplating. But there's something about those murders and the way the media played them up that still grabs, well, two societies, English and American society, by the throat and never lets go.
So let me ask this one. This is our last contest question. Let's go ahead and get it while we still have time, and then we'll get deeper into this. This is from Andy Nieradko. Let me spell that in case I said it wrong. Nieradko, a supporter of the show, fan of the show. Why do you think Scotland Yard is still refusing to release records pertaining to the Ripper case?
Wow. Yeah, the conspiracy theories abound about the Ripper and Scotland Yard. To me, this is probably one of the biggest embarrassments in law enforcement and investigation maybe there is. And I think, London police and Scotland Yard still embarrassed that they've never been able to establish who it was. When you go back and read some of the evidence and the studies that were done, they had eyewitnesses, they had blood, they had a lot of evidence that makes why they didn't catch him hard to understand.
So tell us why, or tell us what your deal is with why is Holmes Jack the Ripper? Break it down for us.
Yeah, well, you have M.O., modus operandi, probably the most logical suspect there is. And what I did was break down the different killings and use his writings about, he loved to travel. He traveled liners. He had huge amounts of money for the time. He used to go to Paris, London, all over. Anywhere he went, he killed. He was there the summer of 1888. There was a American doctor, this is recorded, who tried to sell skeletons to the University of London Medical School. The first of the Ripper killings, there were 2 or 3 that followed a pattern. The ones after that were looked at to me. They got very strange. They got goofy, and the obvious knowledge that the first 2 the killer exhibited weren't there. You have a man who, strangely enough, removed ovaries from the first 2. And he did it in 3 or 4 minutes in the dark, in the fog, on a London street. Now, I went to some medical professionals, and I asked them, could a man, a normal man, remove the ovaries from a woman in 3 or 4 minutes on a dark street? No. They all said no. When you went to the autopsies in London that were performed on the first 2, the pathologist said there had to be some professional knowledge here. And that was thrown out in a lot of the later attempts to establish an identity, because the killings that came after that were just slashings, and there was no professional knowledge exhibited. So what I tried to do was separate some of them. Now, knowing that he was fascinated with the ovaries and hormones, and he had this obvious ability to remove an ovary from a woman, it just seemed to me too coincidental that he was there. So I worked the story into the book, and I didn't have a lot of direct evidence, and I got, like I say, I was attacked by people who said, don't put it in the book. Everyone likes to attack anyone that says they know who Jack the Ripper was. So then, lo and behold, once the book came out, I started contact with Mark, to Mark Potts. And he started telling me, no, you're right, and I have evidence to show it, and I'm going to try to establish that with some expert conclusions. So we've been waiting, these last few months for the expert that was recommended him by the British Library to review the handwriting. So what Mark did was he gave this expert the handwriting for the Dear Boss and the From Hell letters, the recognized letters of the Ripper, or someone who they think was the Ripper that wrote these letters back in 1888. Mark ran these handwriting samples against the memoirs Holmes wrote while he was in prison. And they're in the copy of Ripperologist magazine. The title of the article is called Jack is Holmes. And when you read the article, the editor of the magazine, the samples, one over the top of the other in the article, and just a layman, you or me, looking at this, you go, it's the same hand. Well, just a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, this expert from the British Library came back and conclusively stated it's the same. And now we've challenged the handwriting experts around the world to tell us where she's wrong. Get on it and tell us where she's wrong. And we haven't had one yet. We've had one other expert come out and say, looks the same to me too. So we're having a lot of fun with this, and right now we're just waiting for another expert to get up and try to challenge this expert whose credentials are awesome, and like I say, was recommended by the British Library. So we're just really excited.
So you think it's a thing with the British being just, there's no way it could be an American. Jack the Ripper's our murderer. You think there's some pushback?
I don't know. I know the Jack the Ripper is an industry over there. I know they make a lot of money off it, and I know they have forums. You go on the web, and there are forums, over huge forums where these experts get on, and all they do is discuss who they think the Ripper was. I know Mark has given a speech in October to the Whitechapel Society, which is another group that just discusses the Ripper and who he was. And I don't want to be cynical, but I don't know if they really want it solved. And for us to say, here he is, guys, this is the one Scotland Yard should have put under a microscope in the first place and checked his schedule, and you didn't. And I wrote in the article, I can just see Holmes back in Chicago chuckling, reading the London Times through the New York Times, and he was never run down, and it seems to me just foolish. And now, from Mark's work, we're proving it's true.
So I'm curious about, he was hanged, wasn't he? And I even saw somewhere he survived a hanging. How did he die exactly?
Well, the books all state. Remember, we talked about that earlier about the Holmes curse. The books all state that Holmes was hung, and then the media came out and said, these 20 or 30 people that suffered death after the hanging were the victims of the Holmes curse. Well, I just don't believe that, and that's why I told you if we get enough sales and generate enough revenue from the book, I'm going to sponsor an expedition to go into Philadelphia and dig up the concrete grave that Holmes was said put in. If we dig him up, we're going to break the concrete open, and we're going to run a DNA analysis with my tissue against his. And it's not totally conclusive because there's too many generations in between, but we can nail it down to where it was probably him or probably not him. And that's what we're trying to do with some of the revenue. So that's what we're... If he wasn't hung, well, then the Holmes curse, there was no curse. He visited these people in their homes or offices, or he followed them to certain places. Now, if it is him, I quite frankly can't explain a Holmes curse to you. You'll have to use your own imagination.
Oh, that'd definitely be creepy digging him up. My God.
Well, I can't wait, and it's something that you'd think the nation would be interested in watching, and I know I'm hoping we get enough sales that we can do it. But anyway, so right now the Ripperologist just came out this last week. It's taken London by storm. We're getting a lot of activity from media that want to talk about Holmes, this American surgeon from Chicago, being the Ripper. So what the editor of the Ripperologist did for me is, there was about 5 years ago a composite drawing done from the eyewitness statements identifying the Ripper back in 1888 by the Big Five media of London and the London police. They did it about 5 years ago. They put that drawing up next to Holmes' portrait, black and white portrait. When you guys see these two next to each other, the nose, the ears, the eyes, it's obvious it's him. So there's not only the handwriting, we have this comparison of a composite and a black and white photograph, and it's amazing to see. The handwriting obviously is direct evidence. To me, these two comparisons of the composite and the black and white just nails it down.
And do you think he was killing the prostitutes to get the hormones, right? I mean, that's why there were only female victims. That's why he's taking the ovaries for the hormones.
I think he was over there to discuss hormone science with a scientist over there. There were some famous ones there at the time. I think he was discussing with hormone science. This is a guess on my part, pure conjecture. And he needed a couple of samples. He didn't want to do this in Chicago while he was building the murder castle before it was ready to produce. And he went to London to do this, and this wasn't a big thing for him, and it got turned into a big thing by the media. and I'm sure he had a wicked sense of humor. His intelligence was way past anything the London police, could have dealt with, and he obviously enjoyed it. It's funny to watch when you track it down a little bit. The murders stop in Chicago about the time the Ripper murders start in London, and start back up about the time the Ripper murders stop in London. I still can't understand why the police didn't go, you know what, we gotta run this guy's schedule down, everything he did under a microscope, and look at this. Had they, I think they would have nailed him right off.
Are you getting a lot of angry people about it, or is anyone getting upset about the Jack the Ripper connection?
Not yet, but I've been warned that many authors wish they had never touched this subject at all, because there are many people that get angry, these denialists they call them, and but they've never been able to deny anyone that came up with direct evidence like this handwriting comparison. And all I'm going to tell them is, hey, hire your own forensic expert. Run it, deny the handwriting. When you guys see it in this article, you'll go, there's no doubt, this is the same guy. And so I'm not too worried about the angry people, because I think they're going to scratch their head and go, this is it. This is probably the one we've waited 123 years for.
Nah, if there's money involved, they're never going to admit. They'll fight you to the death, even if you're completely right.
Well, I'm willing to
Which
do
sucks.
it. I thought about that, and you know what? I decided, when you read the article, you'll see. I bring this out. I thought the information that I had in Mark's work, the world deserved to know the truth about something which has fascinated it for over a century. And you know what? So we get a little anger. But I think the world just needs to make its own decision based on this, the first direct evidence in over 100 years. No more just authors thinking, oh, this penis, like you said, the royalty guy was the Ripper, which we all know was kind of goofy. And now you've got something like this to go, well, if you're going to deny it, don't just stand up and scream after you've had a couple of drinks in a London pub. Give us some evidence against it, and let's see what they come up with.
Definitely. All right, is it time for Mr. Potts? What time is it?
Let's bring him on.
Yeah, it's getting there.
Jojo, summon forth Mark Potts for us. Uh-oh, there it is.
Hello?
Hello, Mark Potts. It's Jeffery Pritchett, Guy Weddle, and Jeff Mudgett, and you're live.
Hey, Jeff. How you doing?
We're doing pretty darkly spooky great.
Cool. Very good, very good.
Well, Mark, if you could tell us a bit about how you got involved in this story of Jack the Ripper and being Holmes, and then tell us what you got.
Sure, I'd love to. Well, it originally started out, I was reading a book about Sherlock Holmes, and one of the questions came up was, who was Holmes, Sherlock Holmes named after? So I started looking up people with the name of Holmes at the time, and I was H.H. Holmes, and I honestly had no idea who it was. Never heard of him. So I looked him up, and I found he was a serial killer in Chicago, and I started looking at the dates, and I'm thinking, hold on, this is kind of rather coincidental that he's so close to the dates of the Ripper murders. So I started looking into some other stuff and came across the BBC profile that they had done with Scotland Yard, and that's the one that Jeff Mudgett mentions in his book. And there's not only the description, but they had done a picture of him, and the picture is virtually identical to Herman Mudgett's. And I just thought, okay, I'm onto something here. there's just no way around it. Plus being a doctor and known for removing body parts and that sort of thing, and that was something that Jack the Ripper was known to be doing. So, okay. So then my next thing was, everything seemed coincidental, but I needed some history. So I started looking up timelines and that sort of thing, and everything that I could find on Herman Mudgett for that particular year kind of stopped. There was just nothing there. I went up, I could find stuff up to 1886, a little bit of 1887, very little of 1888. So it's like, there's got to be something. There's got to be something. So I found a couple pieces then, one that said he was in California, another one then that said, he actually even said he was seen in New York. So it's okay. Now we're moving along here. And then I came across another history piece. Ironically, it was a television piece done in England on the hotel. And in that, they had a piece of autograph that he did while he was in college. And so I copied it, and I started matching that up against the Dear Boss letters in the Jack the Ripper. And I started noticing a lot of similarities in the handwriting. So I thought, okay, yeah, this is definitely the guy. There's just no way around it. So then I started getting more into the Ripper lore, hearing the different stories and stuff, but I wanted to get what was actually written. So then I got, the next piece that I got was, I got a very good book that went back to all the witnesses described and the actual reports, everything. And that's where it was kind of neat, where I found that the murder weapon from Jack the Ripper, was not necessarily just a straight knife. They had mentioned a lot of different knives, and they said it had to be a straight type of knife, but they also mentioned a clasp knife. Now, I didn't know what a clasp knife was, so I had to look that up and found it was a folding knife, and over here it's known as a jackknife. So hence Jack the Ripper. So that's how it just kept going. I just kept finding more and more and more, and it just kept steamrolling.
Very fascinating for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel anything weird or paranormal during any of this?
No, but I'd love to say I did, but I feel like I'm kind of filling in for. There was a reporter that did a piece on him in 1895, and he did a really good job. And I've been able to. His name was Robert Corbett. And I was able to follow along with everything that he has been doing. I think he did one of the best pieces on him. And like I said, back in 1895. And he ran into his wolves, and everything kind of died off. And fortunately, his book is in a very good book about Holmes. And so it's all in there. And that's where the piece came in about him being in California and stuff. And I feel like I'm kind of filling in after all the work that he did, as that's where it gets really neat, and kind of helping set stories straight as far as from the victims and other people. One of the ironic things that I just recently had stumbled upon, we all heard the story about the royal physician, Sir William Gull having been the Ripper. And the problem with that story is the guy was 71 years old and had been recovering from a stroke, so that was extremely unlikely. So I looked it up a little bit more and found where this story actually originally came from. And it came from California, ironically. And one of the people behind it is Dr. Howard. Now, Howard was a name that Holmes used. So now I want to research this a little bit more. Is this a story that Holmes came up with, somehow conjured up to make himself look innocent of those murders, but to blame it on a 71-year-old guy, just not right.
Was the 71-year-old guy the one with the deformed penis?
I don't know if he had that, but 71 years old with recovered from a stroke. There's just no way, and that's the story that people have been telling for, years. And
I think Patricia Cornwell did a book about the artist with a deformed penis. I was just wondering.
Oh, the artist? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something about the artist. But yeah, it makes sense for saying what you and Jeff are saying. I mean, it definitely makes sense.
I don't think a 70-something-year-old man could, overpower someone and, start hacking out body parts, really.
Yeah, but then when I found out where the story came from that was mind-blowing.
I was just going to say, unless he's upset about his deformed penis. I'm just kidding. Go on. What else did you find, Mark?
Well, then I started studying, after I was sure with the whole Ripper thing, I started studying, how did he get around? That was one of the things. How did he get around in London itself, since he wasn't from there? Well, I found out that Charles Dickens Jr. had recently published 2 books of travel guides of London. And then on top of that, you had the recently opened tube, the underground. You have horse cars, and then you have, the cab type of things. And so there was plenty of ways to get around in a city. That was one of the excuses, he was a newbie to a city. How could he get around? Well, without much studying, you can get around a city. And especially London, it really wasn't that difficult. You hop a tube, and where I think he was staying, was right near a tube station, and then all he had to do was take the tube to the Whitechapel area, and there he was.
Yeah.
And then the horse cars, a lot of the places where I found all the any murder took place that he was involved in was near horse car tracks. Now, he could take the horse car, that's like a trolley. We think of it as a trolley, but they called them horse cars because they were drawn by horses, and it was a trolley. And you could take them just about anywhere, but a lot of them stopped at a particular time. But it is not impossible. Most of the killings took place under some sort of moonlight, so he could easily follow the horse car tracks back to wherever he needed to go, if he needed to hop a tube line or whatever. And I found this in other places that I believe he had committed murders. So not impossible.
Definitely. So how did you and Jeff get together and, come across this? I mean, did you just read his book and then contact him, or how did you meet Jeff?
Well, Jeff contacted me on Facebook. Facebook has been very important in just about everything. And he contacted me, and he said, hey, we really like your stuff. And then he said, we got this book together, we're sending it to you, and I read this thing, and it's an outstanding book. I'll tell you that. You get into the mind of the killer. And he mentions the BBC piece in there, which is really cool, because that was one of the things that I, had noticed right away. That was one of the very first things. And then, that's how he contacted me, and it just went on from there, which is really cool.
You guys can hear from Mark's mind. He's taken 123 years of evidence, put it all together, and really put to shame all of the other investigators that ever looked at this thing. And now he's given the world, with this handwriting analysis, the conclusions from this expert, direct evidence, and then coupled that with the composite drawings, and you can see He's solved the world's #1 mystery, and it's amazing. My hat's really off to him.
Oh, thank you. It's been a lot of fun. It actually has, and the people that I've contacted have been fantastic. You know, the Whitechapel Society, that's who I wrote through. The librarians that have helped me at the University of Michigan and down in Austin, Texas. The National Archives over in London. And one of the pieces I got as evidence that has the letter in there, I got the letter from them where it says that he has a hard time finding the New York Herald when he's in London. And that I got from his hometown, the Gilmanton, New Hampshire. I got it from their historical society. And that sits directly across from the house he grew up in.
That's right. He grew up in Gilmanton, and
yep.
That's right. The piece you put on about him having a hard time getting the paper was just amazing. Too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny, it's all there. It's just, trying to piece it all together, and the way he was an incredible storyteller, as it was. So you have to try to go through, what is real, what's BS, and fortunately I could follow a lot of what Mr. Corbett had written back in 1895, because he actually got into the castle and was able to research some things right from the source. So that helped a lot. And then, that was one of the big things I wanted to do was I didn't want to use a lot of other people's stories or ideas. I wanted to go right to the original things, as much as possible. And that helped me a lot.
Hey, Mark, tell them about the speech you're giving in October for the Whitechapel Society.
How, sorry?
Aren't you giving a speech in October in London for the Whitechapel Society?
No, I wasn't invited. Well, there's just no way I can make it at this point. I would love to. I would absolutely love to, but I got some things at home I have to take care of.
Yeah, and that would definitely be a hard speech as far as standing in front of all those people who all think Jack the Ripper is royalty or whatever.
Yeah,
but
I'd go in a second if I could go. I'd be there in a second, And like I said, most people have been pretty good about it. I was afraid I'd be stepping on a lot of toes, and some of the biggest supporters, not only just the Whitechapel Society, but interestingly, the Sherlock Holmes Society of London was a big help with me, trying to look at places where he may have stayed, but what name did he use? If any books actually survived, the Blitz, what name would he have used? And that's one of the problems. But then I found, in researching him a little bit more and studying more of the Ripper, what people had seen, and started noticing he wasn't alone. Well, then, at one of the scenes, he was seen with a very tall man, and that man matches the description of Ben Pittizel, who was Holmes's partner. And
yeah.
Yep. And so that just matched absolutely perfect. It was unbelievable. So it's like, okay, now you've got the two guys, everything else keeps matching up. There's just no way it can't be him. In all honesty, what I'd love to see done is a mock trial, because with what I have, you can definitely put on a court case. There's just no doubt about it.
Definitely, and I hope one day that there is enough funding to do some sort of documentary about all this that needs to be put out there for sure, so that would be pretty excellent. to get all
Yep.
this together.
I don't think there's any question that's going to happen. I mean, National Geographic, A&E, they've all done stories about the Ripper on conjecture and guesswork. Now Mark's come along with evidence, the handwriting, and then pictures they can put up on a TV screen. And there's no doubt that those things are conclusive. And as you listen to Mark tell the story about what his investigation has gathered, it's an amazing story that once you accept the handwriting and these pictures, the other stuff falls into place, and I don't think there's any question that it's going to be an amazing thing to watch, and it's going to be on TV. It's just
a matter of time.
Just a matter of time.
Yep. Well, one of the things then I started researching was the other murders associated to the Ripper, and one of them was down in Texas, the servant girl annihilator. And so I started studying, and I really couldn't piece him there until I got more information from his college. And actually, Mudgett himself wrote that after college he went to go visit his college friends. And as it turns out, there were friends that lived down in Austin, Texas. And at least 3 of the murders took place right near his friend's house. And then all the rest of them took place around the business that his friend had, or the friend's family. And also then, just like in London, they all took place near horse car tracks. It was just another one of those things that you could just keep tracing different things. And I kept looking at old maps, and that's where I kept finding more and more information. So I had to learn a lot about transportation, too. And studying a lot of old maps. Fortunately, a lot of it is online, so that was good.
So when it comes to the actual Jack the Ripper letters that he left behind, was it seems like it was Holmes toying with them, like in a Zodiac killer kind of way, right?
Yeah, he seemed to be playing with them, but somewhere in the letters themselves, once you start reading them in order, there's almost like a weird story to it. And the California letter actually had like a motive to it, and in it had said that he had been in San Francisco, and he had loaned money to somebody, and they took off. So he chased after him, and he said he was going to kill these women because he wanted his money back. Now, incidentally, he had a college mate from London, Buckley, and his father happened to be a minister in Parliament. So that may be why Mudgett, or Holmes as you would know him, was able to send all the letters to these different individuals, because normally, even if you lived in London, you wouldn't know all these individuals that he was sending the letters to.
Definitely fascinating. To me, Holmes just sounds like the devil incarnate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just such cunning intelligence and evil. He almost makes evil look cool.
Yeah. He had an incredible mind. I mean, he was a con artist. He scammed insurance companies. He sold body parts. He just did whatever he could to make some money, and I would not put it past him as far as any kind of blackmail or loan sharking in this case. Maybe.
What are the exact years that his whole reign of terror took place in? What are the years?
As far as the Ripper, it was mostly in the fall of 1888. But I've been able to put the pieces together starting right after college. Matter of fact, I even found a couple possible murders while he was in college. I found 2 guys that, in all probability, had been poisoned, because the same thing shows up later in Chicago. They had gotten sick. Within 5 days, they were dead. And in one case, one guy was taking the other guy's body down to Austin, ironically, and within 5 days, the second guy was dead, en route to Austin.
So the body count just keeps piling up for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Jeff,
I think for Holmes? What are the years of the reign of terror for Holmes as far as the time period again, year-wise?
Well, 1893 was mostly the time for the hotel, but 1884 to 1886 was when they had the murders down in Texas, and then 88 was the Ripper murders, and then the next thing I looked into was the New York City prostitute that had been murdered, and that was probably the simplest one to find, because in his writings and in Corbett's writings, he was taking a trip to Boston at the time, at that exact same time. So it was very easy to trace the timeline there. And then you had to go through New York City to get to Boston, to go from Chicago. And you had to go from it was the Pennsylvania Limited. It ran down from Chicago down to Philly, then up to New York, or actually Jersey City. Then you'd have to pop a ferry, which would take you over to Manhattan, and then they'd have a horse car or whatever to take you wherever you wanted to go at that point to get across the river. And the most popular travel to Boston at that time was the, now I'm going brain dead.
It happened. No worries.
Yeah, the Fall River line. The Fall River line. And that was actually rather interesting. So I started studying, where the murder took place at New York, and here it was within a block of where the wharf was for the Fall River line. So it all just kept piecing together. And then I found a really great old newspaper piece that had the whole story in, but whoever the artist was, he was fantastic because he even had the likeness of the victim just down pat. And what he did was he actually was able to take the name from the book, and the name he used there was C. Nick, which was C, period, then K-N-I-C-K. And there was a play on words between scenic, the word scenic, and then Knickerbocker, which, we know the New York Knicks. So that was the only time I've ever seen him actually do a play on words like that. But the evidence there matched pretty much what happened with the Ripper, and they did a sketch based off of what the employees of the hotel saw, and it matched Holmes' picture. It matched him very well, especially his college picture. It just matched it to a T.
So, Mark, do you have any place, like a website where all this is assembled, or where do you have a website or anything?
I don't yet. I'm planning to put one together. My son's going to help me out. And we're going to put a piece together. Right now, most everything I have is on my Facebook page, but we're going to put a separate piece together. And some of my things are on Mudgett's book page, the Bloodstains, the book.
Yeah, I have a Bloodstains Facebook page that Mark's given all of me his collages and the conclusions from the experts in London, and he's been very generous with all this stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's. I'm in it for the love. I feel like I'm doing it for the victims now and for Mr. Corbett, because all those years, and some of them were completely forgotten.
Like my Vlad the Impaler fetish, do you have a morbid fascination with these type things too?
It's just that I'm finally bringing justice to people that had just been forgotten.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Once you get on a roll with something like this, it's kind of hard to stop.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when everything just keeps rolling into place. You know, if it didn't, you know, if I'd hit a brick wall, oh, you know, that's, you know, I'm not going to go there. You know, just if it hadn't been much, I wasn't even looking for, you know, anybody to be Jack the Ripper. I thought it was actually somebody completely different, you know, in all honesty. And then everything just kept falling into place. And it's like, wow, you know. And then I read an interesting article where there's like 400 suspects to Jack the Ripper. And I'm thinking, okay, 400 suspects. Did anybody actually ever look at the serial killer? And evidently not.
Like all these dudes in Scotland Yard were drunk. You're Jack the Ripper. You're Jack the Ripper.
Well, I can't really, you know, it's really hard. I started getting into the history of Scotland Yard and the police department at that time. And this is one thing that much it may not have known, and a lot of Americans do not know, is the difference between what's called the City of London and then in itself. And that was fascinating. It's a completely different jurisdictional section. And they were going through turmoil itself at London, at Scotland Yard, and then the police department inside the City of London was going through their own turmoil. So you had all this going on all at the same time. And it was just, you know, it was just incredible, just absolutely incredible.
Well, that time back then was more, well, just about as crazy as now, if not worse, probably. And they probably had so many other crimes they were dealing with that were just, you know, drunken debaucheries and God knows what.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Non-stop.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, you know, I'm not disagreeing with it. It definitely makes sense. I mean, with the ovaries and traveling, and it definitely sounds spot on. Blood spot on.
Yeah.
Blood spot on. All right, Jeff, so, we're nearing the final minutes. If you want, Jeff, give us your website again.
Well, it's at, thanks, and it's, like I said, you can get it the easiest and the cheapest at Amazon Kindle on the ebooks or Smashwords or iBook. If you want a copy, and maybe I can get you a signed one, you can get it at www.bloodstainsthebook.com. And before we go, I'd like to add a little something about Mark. He put this information out, you know, a few years ago, and he was roundly criticized, and he showed a lot of courage. He stuck with it, and then when Bloodstains came out, he jumped back in, and I really admire him. It's a tough subject to be the one man against the entire world and hang with your theory, and then what a feeling it must be to have it proven true, and it's all coming out right now.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right, everybody. Well, we're at the tail end, and I thought to end the show we would sing a Jack the Ripper song. I'm just kidding.
Actually, there was one.
Is there? Do you know the lyrics? Jack
No.
the Ripper was an evil lad. Jack the Ripper was an evil lad.
Yep.
Well, that was a good idea, but hey, maybe I'd like to see those lyrics sometime. Well, gentlemen, it's been a great show. I love doing these true crime serial killer shows. They're a rarity, and we've had a few before, but this one definitely takes the icing in the cake in the fascination level and the darkness level, no doubt. I'm still thinking about that bull story where it kills the matador. It's been an absolute pleasure. Update it and let us know about that documentary, because I definitely want to see that when that comes out.
Cool.
And we'll still be in touch, and I appreciate you both doing the show. It's been darkly wonderful.
Yeah,
fantastic,
guys.
Thanks
for coming
Thank
on.
you, Jeff. Thank you, Guy. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Now have a good night. Everybody check out thechurchofmabus.com. Come mingle on our forum. And mosh, baby, mosh.
Or the
next
Facebook page
Yep.
at the Church of Mabus radio show. Lots
Next
of
week
fun.
next week's Nigel Kerner and John Biggerstaff, some dude that they asked to come on from Tennessee, some biochemist with Nigel. We're going to harass Nigel Kerner about aliens taking your soul, because I don't really buy it, but we'll see what Nigel has to say about it. Good night!
That'd be fun, man.
Yeah. Good night!
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Yep.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.